Okay, everybody, welcome to Engelbert Financial Advisors. My name is Chris Engelbert. We're going to wait just another 30 to 45 seconds while we get started. We are going to give you a little bit of housekeeping. This particular slide is obviously showing my contact information. This webinar is being recorded. So if you're taking notes, that's great, but don't worry. If I go too fast, it's actually going to be recorded and sent to you afterwards as well. We really appreciate everybody getting on our webinar today. We're trying to use technology to its utmost. Some of you have been to our police pension seminars that we have done over the past couple of years. We had done them in Bucks County, Montgomery County, and Harrisburg Area Community College. Obviously, in 2020, we could not do those particular webinars, or excuse me, those particular in-person pension meetings. So we decided to go webinar this year, and we are very excited about today. Today, we're going to spend about 35 to 40 minutes talking about defined benefit pension plans. And again, this webinar is being recorded. So at this particular time, I'm going to get going. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for just a second so that you can see. I'm going to my live camera, and one of the things that we want everybody that's on the webinar today to realize is that anybody that registered for the webinar is going to be getting a copy of my book, Financial Planning and Retirement Strategies for Pennsylvania Police Officers. A lot of work went into this book. It covers in detail many of the topics that you're going to be seeing in our webinar series over the next couple of months. But everybody that's on the webinar today that registered for the webinar is going to be getting a copy of this book. And we're very excited about that for you. So with that, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here and talking about our defined benefit pension plans and what's going on in the defined benefit pension plan world today. Just another bit of housekeeping as well. If you would like, I'm kind of holding the questions and answers probably till the end. There is a Q&A chat bar up at the top. And so if there's a question, put it in there. We'll go through those at the end as well. So here we go. We kick off, defined benefit police pension plans and what's going on. So just to give you a little bit of our background here, Engelbert Financial Advisors, we are a registered investment advisor. I've been doing this consulting to defined benefit pension plans for literally over 37 years. We know all aspects of defined benefit plans for police. Our next webinar is going to be all about drops. We do 457 plans, etc. So we have a tremendous amount of experience in this area. Please use us as a resource if you have any questions. Especially, I get a lot of calls during contract negotiations, talking about, hey, we're trying to do this with our contract, what about this, etc. Please reach out to us and talk to us about this, because obviously we have a lot of experience. We talk to many, many different townships and boroughs all the time, and we can tell you what's going on in one particular municipality, what they have versus what somebody else doesn't have, etc. So let's talk about your defined benefit pension plan. This really isn't a mystery because obviously it's been around in the state of Pennsylvania for many years. Sometimes you hear of it referred to as the Act 600 plan, but basically what the defined benefit plan means, and if you think about the word defined benefit, what that means is that you are getting a particular benefit when you retire as a police officer. One of the other things that we think you should do is that many of you that have signed up may have been police officers for a while. Please take the younger police officers under your wing. Maybe share this webinar with them to educate them so they understand that you have a very valuable pension out there. So how does your defined benefit pension plan works? Obviously, what happens is you have to reach age and years of service. Usually it's 25 years of service, age 50. In order to start collecting your pension, in order to collect your defined benefit pension. Now, typically that's based upon 50% of your last 3 years' salary. So what you see many people do, many police officers do, is they try to get as much time as they possibly can the last couple of years, in order to pump up their defined benefit pension plan. Nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to come back to that point in the next couple of slides, because when you get to contract negotiations, some things are changing out there. The other thing that many of you may have realized if you've been around or been a police officer for a while is that many people in the private sector are extremely jealous of your defined benefit plan. And the reason being is that the private sector has done away with defined benefit plans over 30 to 40 years ago. I worked with some defined benefit plans back in the 80s and 90s when they were being shut down. But really, you get a lot of private sector people going, hey, I'm a township supervisor and I got a 401k, I don't have a defined benefit plan. And they're obviously, jealous of your defined benefit plan. So it's one of those things that it's a very valuable benefit. The good news is that you get a defined benefit. The bad news is that most police officers retire much earlier or younger than everybody else out there. And we're going to talk about that some more in a few later slides. But also, if you are in our other webinar series, as far as drops and 457s, you're going to see that that comes to play as well. So the other thing that you have to realize, and it's also a chapter in our book, is that depending upon when you start as a police officer can really factor into your pension. And what I mean by that is sometimes you get a police officer who is 25 years old, and then at age 35, he decides to go to another department and collect a pension in that department. Well, the real problem is going to be is that he may not have enough time as far as age and years of service to collect that second pension. So I always tell police officers that 10 to 12 years into your career is very, very important, because at 12 years, you're vested in your defined benefit pension plan. So once you're vested, then at what they call superannuation or retirement, you're going to receive a small amount of that pension when you go to retire. But one of the things that people don't understand is that you may not be able to have enough time if you're older. So the other thing that we want to talk about is we want to talk about your pension and what happens if you die, or obviously if you get divorced. Now I could literally spend 45 minutes talking about what happens if you get divorced. And in some of you that have been in our in-person pension seminars, we have Jonathan Kramer from Conrad Siegel. He specializes in calculating what your ex-spouse will receive as far as your pension. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about here, and there's a question that came up that I'm going to answer in a minute. But if you're contemplating a divorce, unfortunately, please reach out to us before you get too far down the road, because there's a lot of misconceptions as far as what happens with your pension in a divorce. And I'll try to clear up a couple of them right now. First of all, there's a common misconception that there can be a lump sum paid out. So many times I get contacted by the attorney of your soon-to-be ex-spouse, and they're like, we want to value this pension and we want a lump sum settlement. There is no lump sum settlement that can come from a defined benefit plan. However, upon superannuation or retirement, your spouse then is entitled to 50% of your defined benefit pension plan for the rest of her life. Now, obviously, there's some funny things that go on. I happen to know a police officer that after he retired, he got divorced. He paid the first wife 50%. He then got remarried, got divorced again. And the second wife wanted a part of his pension. And we had to constantly tell him, no, it's only the first wife that gets 50% of your defined benefit pension plan. So one of the things that we're really trying to have people understand is that if you're obviously going through a divorce, contact us early on as far as some strategies and things like that to really help you understand what happens to your pension in divorce. And again, we could do a whole nother webinar on that. We have a question here that was submitted to us about paying 5% into the Act 600 pension, and that the wife is entitled to 50% of the pension if I die before she does. If we both happen to die shortly after I retire, what happens to the money I paid in? Does that stay in the pension, or is there a beneficiary? Well, yeah. So if you are paying a 5% member contribution, and if both the husband and wife die, unfortunately, that member contribution stays with the pension fund, is what it ends up doing. That 5% member contribution is literally a part of your defined benefit pension. And it's something that if you're not making member contributions, you're very fortunate because the majority of the defined benefit plans that we see are making member contributions. Now, the only place that member contributions really come into play, that 5% member contribution, is that if you leave before that 12-year vesting that I talked about. If you leave before the 12-year vesting, you will get your member contributions back, and they should be being taken out before tax. If they're taken out before tax, you can actually roll those over to an IRA. But once you're vested and you're making your member contributions, that's part of your pension that you get paid back. A couple more questions going on here I'm going to address in a minute, but I want to get on to our next slide here and talk about some other things I think are really important. One of them is formulating a pension board. We see this all the time, and we see that many people don't answer or don't get information on their pension plan. And really what you got to understand is you got to understand who are all the players in your pension plan, because many times I'll get a phone call from a police officer and you'll say, hey, so-and-so is running our pension plan. I said, okay, great. That happens to be the actuary. They're not really running the pension plan. So this slide here talks about who all the players are as far as what goes on with your defined benefit pension plan. There's got to be a custodian. It may be a bank, it may be a brokerage firm, but there's a custodian that actually holds the money. For example, one of the consulting firms that does a lot of defined benefit plans out there uses US Bank as a custodian. So you may see statements from US Bank. Now, the other important part of it is a pension consultant. Now, we act as a pension consultant in our job here at Engelbert Financial Advisors. There are many other pension consultants out there. Basically, what a pension consultant does is they're the quarterback of the plan. They oversee the asset allocation. They help to hire the money managers. They do performance reporting. They put together, quarterly meetings. They really communicate with the trustees about what's going on with the plan, who's paying, money out, how much the monthly payout is, what are the returns of the plan. And I'm going to talk about the returns of the plan because they've been very good the last 2 years. So you really need to ask some hard questions as far as who's actually running the plan, because that'll give you an idea that we're going to talk about in a minute about what the costs are for your plan. Now, this is all public information. I've gone into townships where I've had police officers tell me, hey, we don't get any information. And I'm like, well, this is really public information because all this information has to be given to the actuary who files with the state. There's no reason why you as a police officer cannot find out what's going on with your pension plan. So another player in your defined benefit pension plan are the money managers. Now, this is where it gets confusing sometimes because sometimes the pension consultants act as the money manager. So many of the pension consultants the last couple of years have become what they call OCIO, or outsourced chief investment officers, where basically the township or the borough says, hey, we don't want to do this. We don't want to take the responsibility for it. You just run everything. Well, we don't think that's a really good idea because we have done a lot of analysis of many of the OCIO products that are out there. Again, OCIO stands for outsourced chief investment officer. And so many of the consulting firms, their OCIO products are mediocre at best. We prefer where a consultant comes in, helps to set the fund's asset allocation, hire some third-party money managers, may use some indices. Now, I can go into a whole presentation about the trend over the last 10 or 15 years where many defined benefit plans have been sold, hey, we need to index our entire plan because if we index our entire plan, we're going to save all kinds of pension costs out there. We actually think that's a fallacy. We actually believe that we are on the cusp between last year and this year where indexing your entire pension plan will actually cause your pension plan to underperform is what will end up happening. So know who the players are, the money managers out there. You may have a couple of active managers. Maybe when you go to a meeting, you see your consultant sitting there talking about the plan. They bring in a money manager who talks about what they're doing with their portion of the fund, whether they're what's called a fixed income manager or whether they're a large cap growth, large cap value, whatever it is that they do. But you have to understand everybody that's out there. The other person that's extremely important is your actuary. We are not an actuarial firm, but we work with many very good actuarial firms. There's some good actuarial firms, and there's some that are not so good. You want to have your actuary be able to tell you what the financial health is of your plan and how well it's doing. I'll give you a little preview because, like I said, the last 2 years have been very good in the investment markets, and that's really helped your actuarial ramifications of your plan. So 1/1/21, an actuarial valuation is going to be done this year. That's going to determine how much money has got to be put into your pension plan by your municipality over the next 2 years. And so you need to know this because when you're negotiating your contracts out there, what ends up happening is that when you go to contract negotiations, basically what happens is they look at you as one whole cost package. How much in salaries, how much in health benefits, how much in retirement benefits. And what you want to do is you want to parse those down and say, okay, we're asking for this as far as pay goes. We're asking for this as far as healthcare benefits. And oh, by the way, from a retirement standpoint, here's what we're asking for. Now, if you know the health of your defined benefit plan, don't let them snow you and say, well, our unfunded liability is pretty good. We have an unfunded liability. Our plan is usually what the term is that they use is our plan is only 75% funded. So we have an unfunded liability of 25%. Well, you know what? Unfunded liability of 25% or a funded status of 75% is not bad at all. But like we said, the last 2 years, we've seen returns have done really, really well. And you're going to see some of your pension plans get to be 85 to 90% funded. Now think about this in terms of your home mortgage. If you had your home paid off and you only owed 10 or 15% on your home, you'd be in pretty good shape. The same thing happens with your defined benefit plan. If you're over 85% funded, you're in really, really good shape. So that's why the actuary is very important, and you have to understand what the actuarial valuation is and how it works, because some of the things are going to be changing on the 1/1/21 valuations that they're going to be doing out there. So get to know the actuary. I would certainly request, and the actuaries I work with do this, I would request that your actuary comes and gives you a presentation on your 1/1/21 valuation. They will have that done probably June, July, August. Have them come to one of your pension meetings and have them tell you what's the status of funding for our pension plan, because that'll be very important if you're doing any kind of contract negotiations. So one of the questions I just got is superannuation equal to vesting, or is it when you hit the required age and full retirement? Very good question. Superannuation is just a fancy term for when you hit age and years of service for your full retirement. So that's what superannuation means from that standpoint. So if you hear somebody say, hey, I need to reach my superannuation age, or I need to reach superannuation, that just means age and years of service have to be met in order for you to get, obviously, the defined benefit retirement is what it ends up doing. Let me talk about what's going on now. And I've been getting a lot of calls lately because it seems a lot of you police officers are in contract negotiations right now. And so far from what I hear is that contract negotiations are going pretty well from the standpoint as far as pay raises go. But let me talk about what's going on currently as far as pension trends go so that you are locked and loaded when you're going into your collective bargaining agreement out there. Now, there's been a very smart guy, and we have him at our in-person pension seminars, a guy by the name of Rick Paulson. He's a labor attorney, extremely good labor attorney. And Rick will always tell you that the best benefit that you can get when it comes to your defined benefit plan is a pay increase. Because if you think about it, if you are making more money, if your W-2 is going up, your defined benefit plan is based upon the last 3 years, 50% of the last 3 years of your W-2. So anything you can negotiate for as far as pay raises will really help you, because obviously it raises your retirement benefit down the road. But let's talk about what's been going on the last 2 years. In 2019, the stock market did very, very well. We saw a lot of defined benefit plans return 14, 15, 16%. in 2019. Well, lo and behold, 2020 started off obviously very scary with the pandemic. We had the sharpest, shortest decline in the stock market. We lost almost 35% in 2.5 weeks. We then recovered and went on to new all-time highs in the stock market. The bond market did extremely well in 2020. So you're looking at returns of your defined benefit portfolios, and this is why you need to be on the pension board and you need to find out what the returns are, because in 2019, like I said, many pension funds did 14, 15, 16%. In 2020, many pension funds did 14, 15, 16%. So you had pension funds since the last actuarial valuation return anywhere from 25 to 30%. Now, why is that important? It's because you have an actuarial assumption of anywhere from 6 3/4 to as much as 7 1/4. What does your actuarial assumption mean? Well, that's the assumption that the actuary is using, talking about how much interest or what the return is of your pension plan and what it needs to be every year. So if your actuarial assumption is 7%, and oh, by the way, that will be in your actuarial report. If it's not, there's something wrong with your actuary. But find out what your actuarial assumption is, because if you have a 7% actuarial assumption and your pension fund returned 15%, you just beat your actuarial assumption, not by a little bit, but by a lot. Now, the problem is the biggest driver to returns and the health of a defined benefit plan is what the investment returns are. That's the biggest driver. So if there's a year that your pension fund has lost money down 3 or 4%, well, your actuarial return is at 7%. Guess what? That actuarial clock is ticking. Your fund was down 4 or 5%. You've not only got to make up the actual return, actuarial assumption, you got to make up more than that is what you've got to do. Now, what does that mean for 2019 and 2020? Well, literally, you're going to see some actuarial evaluations. Your funded ratio of your plan, if you were 80% funded back in 2019, 1/1/19, when the last valuation was done, you are probably close to 90 or 95% funded. There's been a huge jump in funding as far as how well your defined benefit plans are going to do. Now, here's what's going to happen next, is that whenever there's a huge actuarial gain, that's a very good point for you, because guess what? That means the MMO, and I haven't talked about this, so pay close attention. The MMO, the minimum municipal obligation, that's what the actuary calculates when he does the actuarial assumption. The MMO, or how much the municipality has to put into your pension plan in 2022 and 2023 will have dropped significantly. So the 2 good years we've had in the investment markets is really good for police officers, because your plans are much better funded. But then if you're going into contract negotiations, you are now understanding that the MMO, or how much the township or borough has to put in, is going to drop dramatically. However, there's some little tricks that are going to be going on. So the actuaries are going to be using the fact that you've got really good investment returns. They're going to be using that to upgrade the mortality tables. What's a mortality table? Mortality table is basically when everybody in the plan is supposedly going to die. I got to love my actuary buddies. They're great guys, but they tend to be dry. But they are always talking about, hey, women die at 87, according to the latest actuarial tables. Men die at 86. Why do men die a year earlier? Because they want to. Obviously, can't get any laughs going here, but it's something that you have to understand how actuaries work. So upgrading your actuarial table is not a bad thing, but it does increase the plan costs a little bit. However, the last 2 years have been so good as far as the investment markets go, it's not going to really mean that much, and it's a good thing that they're doing. So again, understand what your actuarial assumption is for your plan, number one. Number two, find out what the investment returns for your plans are, because that'll show you when you get your actuarial report in the summertime how well your plan's funded status has done. So what does that do? It gives you ammunition in contract negotiations. So if you're trying to go for a pay raise or a benefit, healthcare benefit increase, and they're coming back and saying to you, oh, we don't know if we can do that. Well, you can drop a truth bomb on them by saying, well, we understand that your MMO is going to drop significantly in 2022 and 2023, and you're going to be able to afford to pay us X, Y, and Z. So have that in your back pocket from a negotiating standpoint, because it'll greatly help you, and you should know all of these things as well. Now, some of the things that we see out there which are coming down the pike, and if you haven't experienced them in contract negotiations, you probably will. There's a trend out there towards using base W-2 calculations for new officers, for the last 3 years. So remember, your defined benefit pension plan calculation is based upon your earnings over the last 3 years, 50% of those earnings. Now, some municipalities allow you to plug in your vacation time, your sick time, anything that you have in there, and you're able to pump that number up. And if you pump it up significantly, it can mean literally, a couple of $100,000 more to you as far as your defined benefit pension goes over your lifespan. So we're seeing some townships get smart with this and say, hey, listen, for all the new hires from now on, we're only going to allow base W-2 wages to be used in pension calculations. Now, the problem that we have with that, and again, Rick Paulson, a labor attorney, spells this out very well, is that basically you're setting the old guys off against the new guys. And the problem that you have with that is that the new guys in 10 or 12 years will realize that, they've kind of been rolled under the bus, and they'll be coming back and going, hey, we want to change that to total W-2 compensation, for the last 3 years, 50%, in order for our defined benefit calculation. And also the thing that it doesn't really move the needle that much, but it kind of gives the municipality a win if they're able to negotiate that point. So just be careful about what they're doing and why they're doing that. And then you can see my other bullet point is the elimination of unused sick time, vacation time. You hear that bad term out there that talks about pension spiking, practices where they roll all of the sick time and vacation time in the last 3 years, and you can increase somebody's pension by, literally $10,000 or $15,000 a year. Again, when you're negotiating your contract, make sure some of these points are in your contract. When we do our 457 webinar that we're going to do in April, we're going to talk about what happens if you get this, get sick time and vacation time paid out to you in a lump sum. There's some things you can do with your 457 plan, but I just want to talk about trends that we're seeing in the defined benefit plans today. So the other thing that we want to talk about is this goes back to having a pension board, having regular pension meetings, having your pension consultant come in and tell you what's going on with your plan. All of these things fit together, in order to have you have knowledge to be able to negotiate as far as what's going on. So, how much does it cost you to run your pension plan? Who, again, we showed on our previous slide who all the players are, the consultant, the actuary, the money managers, the custodian. You got to ask some hard questions. Now, we have a product that we do for large pension plans called RFP Referee, where we don't act as the pension consultant. What we do is we help write the RFP for the defined benefit pension plan. We submit it, we get answers back, and we help the municipality decide who they're going to hire. And I can tell you, we did one of those projects for a $50 million defined benefit plan, and they were literally paying $300,000 a year more than what they needed to do as far as the going rate out there to having a defined benefit pension plan managed. So if you don't know the questions to ask, you're kind of flying blind. So these are the questions you want to ask. And usually, the consultant or whoever's running your pension plan, what they do is they try to make this sound like it's really more difficult than it is, because they use the term basis point. All a basis point is 0.1%. So for example, if you've got a $10 million defined benefit plan and somebody says that they're charging you 1% or $100,000 to run your defined benefit plan, that 1% equals 100 basis points. So sometimes you hear, what's a basis point? So 0.5% is 50 basis points. So to be honest with you, if you have a $10 million defined benefit plan and your custodian, your money manager, your pension consultants, and any other investments you have, and you're paying 1% on 10 million, that's not bad. That's very competitive out there. Sometimes we see plans being run for 0.75 or 75 basis points, but you can see here on the slide, what are all the plans, fees, and expenses? If you're using institutional mutual funds, the costs tend to be much lower. If you're using what they call exchange traded funds, the costs tend to be much lower as well. Again, everybody in the plan needs to disclose what they're being paid. And from a fiduciary standpoint, if you're a pension trustee, this is the kind of knowledge that you should have from that standpoint. So one of the other things that we do, like I said, we do an RFP referee product out there, but it's a really good practice to conduct an RFP for your consultant and actuary every 5 years to stay fresh and price competitive. We suggest this all the time because, again, this $150 million defined benefit plan, they had not done an RFP in over 15 years. And it became very apparent that they were overpaying for the services that they had. We had one municipality in the middle part of the state that literally hired a bank over 20 years ago that had never done an RFP, request for proposal, for their pension fund. They had no idea what they were paying, what their returns were, anything like that. So, these are all things that if you're sitting on a pension board, and again, you should really have a pension committee, and you should really have a pension board, and you should really have all of this information disclosed to you. Why is it important? I have a slide here on why defined benefit plan expenses matter. Again, this is a $6.5 million plan with an expense, total expense of 1.5%. If you just decline that expense down to 0.85, you can see that all the way down at the bottom of the right-hand side, you can literally save $4 million over a 20-year period of time. So costs do matter. Now, just like I've said, there's been this huge movement to try to reduce costs to zero by indexing your entire plan. There's a consulting firm out there that goes around and says, hey, we're the Vanguard guys, and we're going to index everything and save you all kinds of money. Well, to be honest with you, we've examined their cost structure and they're competitive, but they're not the least expensive option out there. But we also believe that indexing your entire plan is not going to be helpful in the long run, because we've been doing this a long time and we've been seeing that everything runs its course. And what we mean by that is you have a situation where for a couple of years, the indices outperform active managers. And then there's a couple of years where active managers outperform the indices. Ever since last year in 2020, we've seen active managers greatly outperform indexes out there. And we think that trend is going to continue for at least the next 2 to 3 years. So if your plan is all actively managed, or if your old plan is all indexed, that's a problem. If you don't have a pension committee, you may not know whether you're indexed or not indexed, or actively managed or not actively managed. So, get a pension committee formed, find out who's running everything in your pension plan, find out what the costs are. So on our last slide here, and then we're going to go to some questions in a minute, you don't really need to conduct your pension meeting every quarter, but 3 times a year seems to be about the sweet spot. This year would be very important to have it done, because literally the pension plans we consult for, we have a meeting sometime in August, September, where the actuary comes in, and the actuary gives his report and talks about the status of the fund and how the fund is doing. And like I said, because the last 2 years have been very, very good, you're going to have a situation where your funded ratio has improved dramatically, and your minimum municipal obligation is going to drop. And we think for some municipalities, it could drop significantly. If your MMO that your township or borough pays doesn't drop significantly in this next evaluation, you better be starting to ask some questions about what's going on. So here we talk about pension plan updates. These are a lot of questions that you want to ask. What are the plan returns net of fees and expenses? We took on a project in our RFP referee product that we do. It was a large pension plan, and the investment entity that was running the pension plan refused to give out what the returns were net of fees and expenses. And we actually, we had to be a little strong with them and said, listen, the way you're reporting this is totally inaccurate. And because you're an SEC registered investment advisory firm, this could end up being reported to the SEC. Once we uttered those words, it was surprising that within a week we had the plan returns net of fees and expenses. You want to see the trend of your pension fund. Any good pension consultant worth their salt is going to be able to give you what your pension fund did last year, 2019, 2018, 17, 16, 15, because the actuary will also calculate a return, and it'll be very similar to what the pension consultant's return is as well. And the actuary and the return of your plan, should be able to, jive together. So if the long-term return of your plan is 8% and your actuarial assumption is 7%, that's really a good thing, and that tells you that good things are happening. That's the second to last bullet point is, what's your plan's performance outlook and how does it dovetail with the actuarial assumption? Like I said, you guys, anybody doing contract negotiations now, you're in a very good situation because these defined benefit pension plans have done extremely well the last 2 years. And you're going to reap a lot of benefits from that. So I got a couple more questions on the board. One of the questions is, once I retire, are taxes taken out automatically every month and a deposit made into my pension account? So basically, the defined benefit plans that we work with, when somebody retires, their defined benefit pension plan, we strongly suggest that it be direct deposited into their bank account. You can have taxes taken out. You can withhold 10%, 15%. You can withhold whatever you want. It's probably a good thing to do, especially if you get another job, because a lot of our police officers end up retiring and then they go and get another job and they've got their pension being paid to them. And we usually suggest at least 10% taxes being withheld when you receive your pension. Another question I got a little bit off topic was, and this is going to be much more for our next webinar that we're going to do, is the next question I got was, our township's actuary calculates the cost of drop as a benefit at over $25K a year, while the neighboring township's actuarial calculates it as a low-cost benefit. How do we overcome this to see the drop as a low-cost benefit? So this is the games that are played all the time, is who's got the best actuary out there. And so what I strongly suggest you do is that many times you have a plan actuary for your defined benefit plan, and you can hire as a PBA or as an FOP, you can hire your own actuary to do valuations. And so one of the trends we've seen, and you're going to, you see on this last slide, our next webinar is going to be on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. It's going to be all about drop. We're going to discuss this in length, but one of the things that happens when you're negotiating for the drop is that they don't want to give it to you for whatever reason. And, we'll go into in depth why we think it's a very valuable pension benefit to have. But one of the things that they do is they have the actuary assign a cost to the drop. We think that that's really a bad strategy on the municipality's part, because literally, if you understand how your pension is calculated and how it works once you enter drop, there are no additional pension costs to having a drop, number one, and number two, calculating the drop. So we think it's disingenuous of an actuary to put a calculation on there that there's a cost to drop. What they're really trying to do is they're really trying to make it so that the drop doesn't seem to be a good benefit to give. You guys have a lot of firepower right now because, like I said, you have a situation where your funded ratio is extremely good. You're going to see the MMO go down, as far as your municipality, what they've got to pay in your defined benefit plan. You're going to see this MMO drop rather dramatically for 2022 and 2023. You got to remember the way your actuarial evaluation works, that how much money they put in for 2021 was determined in the 2019 actuarial evaluation. I know that's a little hard to follow through, but there's always a 1 year lag as far as what's going on. So the January 2021 valuation that's going to be done over the next couple of months and presented to your municipality this summer is going to determine how much money they've got to put in 2022 and in 2023 as well. So anybody else have any questions? I'll open it up here for a few more questions. We got a couple of more minutes here. That anybody can ask a question if they want. Again, if you want to ask a question, there's the Q&A up on the webinar screen. You can click on that. You can type your question in, and we can take any more questions. I know I've covered a lot of information on defined benefit plans, but again, I'm going to really push our book for you guys. You're going to receive a copy in our book. We cover, everything that I'm saying on the webinar is covered in the book. You're also going to receive a copy of it, a copy of the webinar as well. So here we go. We got another question talking about negotiating an early retirement. This one has to be a salary payout as compensation and pay for unused leave. So one of the things that, so this happens all the time. And again, this is going to go more for our drop webinar, but one of the things to remember that, in your drop, you can commit for your drop. What you can end up doing is you can leave before the end of your drop. So if you have a 4-year drop, you can leave after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, etc. We see a lot of officers get round number itis as far as drop goes. And so one of the things, you can do is you can leave early from your drop. And so, if you're thinking about doing that, sometimes we see, the negotiations happen where, hey, I might be leaving early from my drop. And oh, by the way, what do we end up doing? Or I may take a lump sum payout. There are some things that you can do, from that standpoint, to take advantage of that. So again, just to kind of summarize everything. Here we got another question. One of the, okay, here we go. This is a good question. Is PMRS, a Pennsylvania Municipal Retirement System, considered a money manager, and are you familiar with them? Well, I am extremely familiar with PMRS. And in fact, I have worked diligently over my career to extract a half a dozen police pension plans out of PMRS. I could literally do a whole nother webinar on PMRS and why you do not want to have your plan in PMRS. First of all, PMRS was really designed years and years ago, over 25 years ago. PMRS was designed to take all the bad pension plans and put them together, or if you were a small pension fund, give you access, etc. The problem with PMRS is that PMRS's internal costs, or the cost to have the whole fund managed, is somewhere north of 2% to have PMRS have your costs managed. The other thing that PMRS does is the municipalities are really being penalized by being in PMRS. The reason why I say that is I told you about actuarial assumptions of 7%, which are commonly used in the plans that I deal with and most plans out there. PMRS uses an actuarial assumption of 4%. So people say, wow, an actuarial assumption of 4%, that's really good. That means that we're really being conservative with our pension plan. Well, for the municipality, it's really penalizing them, because if you have an actuarial assumption of 4%, that's creating a situation where much more money has got to be paid into the pension plan than what really needs to be paid into the pension plan. Now, one of the things that's happening with PMRS, and if you're a police pension fund in PMRS, you should run, not walk, because what's happening out there is that if you've gotten 2 really good years back to back of great pension returns, like I said, 30% over a 2-year time frame is not unusual for rates of return. PMRS is only, quote, crediting your plan 4% each year. That's 8%, while your municipality still has to put, their MMO in. So I would be happy to talk to any police plans that are in PMRS. There are very, very few plans that are still in PMRS. We just took Colebrookdale Township out of PMRS, and they're allowing to do some really good things with that. So Let's see. Okay. Here's a good question. We're currently at 25 years of service, 55 years age of retirement. Suggestions to get to that 25 and 50. This would be a time to go for that. What you want to do is, like I just said, you've had 2 really good years back to back. Anytime there's a benefit enhancement, an actuarial study has to be done. Well, guess what? Your actuary is doing a study for the plan right now. So what you could end up doing is you could end up asking the actuary, hey, we're at 25 years of service and age 55. What would it cost the plan to drop to 25 and 50? This would be the time to go after that age reduction benefit now, because you've just come off of 2 really good back-to-back years. The other question is, our township's actuarial assumption is 8%. Is that too high? That is way too high. I'll tell you some of the horror stories that we've seen out there. For example, we saw a situation where if I had enough time, I'd go back to law school and become a lawyer, because there happens to be a municipality in a county not too far away from us here, where the pension fund manager has a direct relationship with the actuary. That's totally unacceptable. Now, why is that, you say? Well, because the pension fund manager, the person who handles the investment assets, hires the actuary, which is totally a bad deal. He dictates to the actuary, hey, how much, we need to have a good actuarial assumption. And what ends up happening is they drop the actuarial assumption to a point where it forces more money to be put into the plan by the township. Well, guess what? If you're the pension manager and you're charging a fee to manage the township, that's totally unethical, because more money is being forced to be put into the pension plan. So if you've got an 8% actuarial assumption, that's the other side of the bad situation, where a super high actuarial assumption is meaning that not enough money is really being put into the pension plan. So, it's one of those things, that you have a situation where if you see too low of an actuarial assumption like PMRS at 4%, that's bad. If you see too high of an actuarial assumption at 8%, that's bad as well. Here we have another question. We have a 20-year early retirement. How are these normally calculated? If you leave at 20 years with less than 50 years of age and wait till you collect till you turn 50, do you still get hit with a double penalty of early retirement, IRS tax for retiring early? So basically what ends up happening is, let's say you've made it through vesting at 12 years, and let's say that you're 18 years into this and you can't do it anymore. And what you have age 50 and 25 years of service, or 20 years of service, and you leave at 17 years. Well, what ends up happening is you get an actuarially reduced pension benefit. And the way it's calculated is it's 17 divided by 20. So you basically get 17 years worth of a pension calculation. So you can see that if you leave at 15 years, you really pay a penalty from that standpoint. If you leave, early, before, quote, your superannuation date. So even if you leave early, that pension's got to be paid out to you on your superannuation date as well. So unfortunately, if you leave before, let's say you have, age 50 and 25 years of service, and you leave at age 17, or you leave after 17 years of service, you're getting 17/25 of your pension, or you're getting about 68% of your pension is what you end up getting. So, if you have 25 years of service and you make it to year 23, 24, that's one thing if you got to leave. But if you have to have 25 years of service and you make it to 17, that's really, really a hit to what you're doing. Another follow-up on PMRS, is moving the retirement system out of PMRS something our borough needs to do, or is it something a PVA can do? It's got to be sponsored by the borough. So I worked with Colebrookdale Township in a special situation. We hired an actuary. We went back and forth, and we extracted them out of PMRS. And there's some really cool things that PMRS they're making it a lot easier to leave, is what it ends up being. So here's a question. Our plan is a COLA at 20%, but no retirees ever received the COLA. because the wording used in the COLA can only happen if the plan is actuarially sound. Okay, that's a really good question. It's something that you want to consider for collective bargaining, because they're making actuarially sound very vague. And if you remember my first part of my presentation, I said to you that you're going to see your funded ratio jump dramatically during this 1/1/21 valuation. To me, a pension fund is actuarially sound if you're 85% funded or greater. If sometimes they say, well, actuarially sound means 100% funding. Well, I would parse that, and I would go back and I would, collectively bargain for putting exact language in there, because one of the things that happens is that if your pension plan gets fully funded, your municipality then loses their state aid. So I always tell a municipality, you never want to get fully funded. You want to be like 98 or 99% funded, because if you're 98 or 99% funded, you're going to still be getting state aid. So I would really, get in there and in your next collective bargaining, hammer out some way to say, what does actuarial sound mean? I would go to bat for you all day and say, if your plan has a funded ratio in any 1 year of more than 85%, you're actuarially sound. Because believe it or not, COLAs are going to become very important in the future. I was in a situation with a defined benefit plan that a lot of retirees from 20 years ago hadn't gotten any COLAs. And you had police officers that retired 20 years ago that were still collecting a pension, and they were getting $1,000 a month. And what ended up happening was the defined benefit pension plan, this particular police municipality did an ad hoc COLA. You could go in if you wanted to, and here's an idea, is that if you're in pension negotiations right now, you could go in and say, hey, we'd like to do a one-time ad hoc COLA. Our funded ratio has exploded. We're 85, 90% funded. We'd like to bargain for a one-time ad hoc COLA for all the retirees of maybe a couple $100 a month. Your actuary would be able to cost that out, is what they'd end up doing. So my last question I'm going to wrap up with, it's a good one. Can a municipality ever declare bankruptcy or financial hardship to a degree that endangers future pension payments? Well, that's the funny little thing about Act 600, is that, no matter what, your municipality is on the hook to pay your pension, is what they are. Whether they got to pay it out of general fund, or if they've got a defined benefit plan, like most, hopefully all of you have, they would obviously pay it out of the defined benefit plan. And so, there's been some threats of bankruptcy. Act 47 has been used by Johnstown and Pittsburgh to try to scare police officers into giving up benefits. But the one thing is that your Act 600 plan is locked in and solid. So even if your municipality went in the worst case scenario, Act 47, they still got to pay pension benefits, is what they've got to do. So don't let them scare you from that standpoint. I haven't heard that talk in a while, but that's a really good question. So again, I would like to wrap it up here. We've gone a little bit longer than I wanted to. Again, I want to thank everybody for being on this webinar. We really appreciate it. Look in your email. Also check your junk files, because sometimes this stuff goes to junk. But look in your email for our next webinar, which is going to be March 17th at noon. It's all going to be about drop. Sometime Friday or Monday, you're going to get an email with a recording for this webinar, so you can share it with your other officers or use it for training at some time. And if you have any questions that you want me to answer offline, do not be afraid to shoot me an email, call me. Our contact information is obviously on our first slide here. Reach out to us. This is something we do all the time. So we greatly appreciate it. We're going to wrap it up now. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you next month for Drop, Drop, Drop.